Okay, welcome everybody. For those of you joining us, we are going to be talking today on the IECC DGC. This is code hearing number 9. We will be covering, if you can see on the screen, the agenda, 3 commercial items and 3 residential items at today's hearing. We'll be following Robert's Rules of Order, and for those of you not familiar with those, I'll go through those real quick while we wait for some of the panelists to join in. The proposal will be introduced by the moderator, which is myself. We will then ask the proponent to speak and give us a brief summary of the proposal. We will then ask anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of that proposal to raise their hand, and they'll have 2 minutes to do so. Once everybody has spoke in support, we will go to anybody that wants to speak in opposition of the proposal from the general public. They will also have 2 minutes to do so. From there, we go to the committee to ask any questions of the proponent about the proposal. Then we go back to the general public for any rebuttals and support. You will have 1 minute to do so. After that, we go to rebuttals and opposition from the general public. They will also have 1 minute to do so. From there, back to the committee for any modifications or anything of that nature, any motions. And then if there is a call, if there's a motion for vote, I'll call a vote and we will vote on that. So with that being said, I'm going to look to see at our attendance, make sure we have more committee members joining, and then we will get started. Okay, looks like we got a good number of committee members now, so we'll get started. The first item of business, well, actually, let me back up. Before we get started, the way we communicate here is by raising hands. So if you want to speak, please raise your hand. If you can see my screen, the agenda, or if you can't, either way, please raise your hand. I want to make sure everybody can use that raise your hand function, including the general public, because that is how we know you want to speak in support or opposition. So make sure everybody can do that at this time. Good, I'm seeing the panelists do it. We got a few other panelists that still need to raise their hand. I see a couple people from the general public raising their hands. Great. All right, you can go ahead and lower your hands. Thank you. And the first item of business here will be item number 20 on the commercial side. Just a reminder before I turn it over, I believe Sean's going to give us a brief recap here. Item number 20 we heard at the last hearing, and it was tabled. There was a motion to modify it briefly, just to take out some parentheses in there, and we did that. And then it was tabled until this hearing. We also had heard, we had asked the general public at that time for anybody that speaks in support or opposition, and we went through all that, and we came back to the committee for questions, then we went back to rebuttals, back to the committee, and it got tabled. So unless things have changed significantly, we will start on item number 20 in the discussion portion from the committee and not have another opportunity for the general public on that, unless things have changed. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Sean share his screen. I believe he's the one that's going to give us a brief summary update on item number 20.
Yep, I will share. So you should be able to see it now. Supposedly. There we go. So I can give a re-summary if the committee wants one, but in the interest of time, I'll just let it go to discussion. But we want to cover this completely. So if you do want us to go back through key elements, then we certainly can to get everyone back up to speed.
Okay, so Sean, I guess if I see a hand up from the committee, anybody want to have a recap of this before we go into the discussion part from the committee? So raise your hand.
Okay, Paul. Paul, looks like we have at least one person that would like to. Paul, do you want to speak real quick?
I was just, well, it's mostly because we were in the midst of moving. I missed some of the meeting. I was just wondering if someone could provide a brief recap on this. I would appreciate that.
Sure. So this proposal does a handful of things, and we'll cover what it does on that overview scale. Different from the last time the committee saw this, not as in the last meeting, but when it came through the first round. The big difference is that site energy compliance path has been moved out of C407, where it was nested with the energy cost Appendix G approach, and it's been moved into a standalone appendix. This is just for improved usability. So everything that you need for site energy compliance is here in this appendix, and C407 is not cluttered with anything from site energy where there's the potential for confusion. Other than that, this proposal is similar to the site energy provisions that were in before. However, ASHRAE has come out with an addendum CH for Appendix G, which is using alternate energy metrics like site energy with Appendix G. So we have just pulled all of that over. And the idea here is we want to leverage the good work that ASHRAE is already doing. The addendum's not final, but it's very close to final, which means that this is very likely what users will see in the next edition of ASHRAE. So this will provide consistency for users as they go through using Appendix G. Most of the modifications that are made to Appendix G in here are really just to replace energy cost with site energy. So almost all of it is editorial, but that still means you have to hit all of those places where energy cost is mentioned. Couple of key things here is that there is just this pointer that I'm highlighting to remind people that there is a connection to Energize Denver. There's no requirements here. It really is just informational, particularly for any practitioners who might be coming from out of market. It includes the mandatory requirements that we saw for the regular Appendix G and C407, just for consistency, so that we're seeing the same mandatory requirements in all of our modeling paths, and that those are as consistent with the prescriptive path as possible. They're not going to line up entirely, but we want them to be as consistent as possible. And then the last thing to note is, down here in the table, these BPFs are based on the new methodology for creating BPFs, which tends to be a little less stringent in most cases than the old methodology, but these are still BPFs for ASHRAE 90.1 2019. So the stringency level is 2019, even though the methodology is 2021. And you can see here, this is the edit that was proposed at our last meeting to remove the occupancy types and to just have the building types as descriptors, which is what we see in ASHRAE and the modification that we've made in the other modeling paths. So that's the quick high level overview. I'm happy to answer any specific questions that anyone might have.
Thank you, Sean.
All right, thanks, Sean, for the recap there. So like I said, as I mentioned before, we will not go to the general public on this one since we already went through that process on the last hearing, and it was tabled during the discussion portion of the committee. So committee, this is your time to, I guess, ask any further questions if you have any, or to make a motion. And that motion can be modifications, it can be a motion to approve, a motion to reject, all the above. This is your time to do so. Anybody have any discussion or motions to make? Raise your hand. So second time, anybody have any discussion or motions to make? The hand up, Courtney.
Thanks. I'm open to hearing more discussion, but just wanted to make a motion to approve as amended as we see on the screen.
Okay, great. Next hand up is Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I believe this is editorial, but for clarification, under section SE 103.2, which is above the table, in the equation that's shown, we have PSEI sub T in the primary equation, and then below, I believe we're missing the sub T on the PSEI definition right there. So I think that's just cleanup. I want to make sure we just need to do an editorial cleanup there. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the PSEIT is mentioned in the text above where it sets the target. The PSEI is what is actually calculated for the building. So the PSEI needs to be less than the PSEIT.
Understood. Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification. So there's a current motion to approve as amended on the table. Is there a second? Ken, your hand's up.
I'll second that.
All right. Great. So there's a motion and a second. Before I call a vote, I'll give anybody else an opportunity to have further discussion. Please raise your hand if you have any of that, but I'll go to our note taker, Charlie, at this time to make sure we have our numbers in order for voting. Charlie, do you want to do a quick roll call of just the missing people? I know we have a couple subject matter experts and visitors. John Arndt is going to help with subject matter experts. Christine is on there. Let's see, I'm going down the list. Katrina, Robbie, and Sean. So if you want to see if we're missing anybody, call out their names to see if someone's filling in for a voting member, and then we'll get a count of voting members.
Yeah, definitely. I think there might be more names to be accounted and names that are accounted for. So I'll just quickly go over the names that are accounted for. And if anybody's substituting for somebody else, you just make that known. But the people I have accounted for are Aaron E, Alan Y, Brian K, Chuck K, Ashley W, Chrissy C, Chuck B, Courtney A, Elizabeth G, Eric B, Jamie B, John B, Ken U, Laura London, Colin Anderson, both accounting for 1 vote, Linda M, Mike W, and Paul K. So if anybody is not just listed or subbing in.
Mike Rodriguez is here.
Great.
It's perfect. Got you. So that's everybody. We should have 17 votes being casted in.
Okay, thank you. So 17 voting members. I see John Arndt has his hand up. Thanks, Charlie. John's a subject matter expert. John, do you have something to weigh in real quick?
Yes. Yes, this might be nitpicking, but certainly agree with the intent and everything here. The table for building performance factor, it has listed all electric properties and then all other buildings. So I don't know whether I would have to look through to see whether we're distinguishing properties from buildings, in that kind of context. I think the intent's probably well understood, but just to be a little bit careful about the classifications. I'm assuming a property potentially could encompass multiple buildings, especially in multifamily.
Sure. So your concern is that the verbiage isn't consistent throughout from property and buildings.
Right, right.
So the definition of all electric properties has been approved already in other proposals, and it's been leveraged as the definition, and it was approved as properties instead of buildings so that it would get at gas infrastructure on the building site and not just in the building.
Right. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Sean. That's what I was thinking. It might be due to the service, wanting to restrict the gas service.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. We do have, looks like Sean stops I stopped sharing there, but we have a motion and a second to approve as amended. So I'm going to call a vote. All those in favor of approving as amended, please raise your hand. I see seeing some hands move. I'll give it a minute here. I see 14. Go ahead, and 15. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. I see 1. Okay, so item number 20 is approved as amended. Thank you all for that. We will move on to the next item of business, which is item number P40. And it looks like I do have a hand up before we get started. Brian, do you have a question? Okay. Let me pull up my screen. P40. And Christine, I believe this is your proposal. So if you don't mind, while I'm pulling it up on the screen, give us a brief summary. Please introduce yourself and give us a brief summary of your proposal.
Kevin, we're going to do the working group introductions the same as we did the last time, and I think we'd actually like to introduce P40 and P38 together if possible. So I'll give a 1 or 2 minute summary of the working group process. Sean will walk through the proposals, and then I would like to ask Christine to speak as both a working group member and the original proponent of these proposals, if that process is okay with you.
Yes, that's fine. You have control of the screen if you would like to share.
Okay, that sounds good. First, before I share, I just want to remind everyone that as we consider commercial electrification, we're considering it in the context of the Energize Denver ordinance, which is already in place and requires existing buildings to electrify space and water heating systems upon system replacement when cost effective at end of system life, starting in 2025 and 2027. And so the working group really started their work looking at these original proposals, which required, you'll recall the original proposals required electrification of all space heat and all water heat in commercial buildings with that context in mind, and really sought to see if they could arrive at proposals that they thought both were more ambitious than Energize Denver and helped new buildings lead the way while being truly practical and doable for our market. So that was the context in which the working group was doing their work. I want to share with you who is in the working group now so that you can see who participated in the process. This was the biggest working group of all of them. And we had a lot of participants and a lot of expertise from mechanical engineers, from owners, reps, and developers, from Xcel Energy. We had labor unions there, we had energy modelers there. And I would just characterize where the working group landed on both space heat and water heat as that sort of careful balance. These proposals are now proposing requirements that are a little bit more ambitious, or have new buildings doing at least as much as is maybe the better description, as Energize Denver. And we restructured the alignment, the proposal, so that it really aligns with Energize Denver and does not allow fossil fuel furnaces or electric resistant space heat. And similarly for water heat, we restructured the proposal to very directly align it with Energize Denver. So it does not allow fossil fuel storage water heaters. Those are the first system types regulated by Energize Denver in 2025. And So this proposal really aligns with Energize Denver to require electrification of those easy to electrify systems as a first step. There's also an effective date of January 1st, 2024 that gives the community time to adjust. So with that introduction, I'll pass it to Sean to walk through the details of the proposals.
So you are looking at the space heating proposal to start with. Let's get to the meat of the proposal. And what you'll note is that the opening line is pretty straightforward. It says fossil fuel warm air furnaces and electric resistant space heating equipment shall not be permitted to be used for space heating. So really the key for this whole proposal is the exceptions. And that's what the working group spent its time trying to really dial in these exceptions to make sure that reasonable systems that might not strictly conform to that were still allowed. So one of the first key things is that there are certain building types that are required to have their space heating on backup power. Hospitals is a common example of this. And so the working group wanted to ensure that there was an exception for those so that those backup power systems wouldn't have to be sized for electric space heating, because that could be a rather substantially sized system. It also exempts any systems, makeup air systems where energy recovery ventilation is prohibited by the International Mechanical Code. This is, there are certain situations where it is difficult to do a heat pump system for makeup air unless you're using energy recovery ventilation. But then there are certain situations where the energy recovery ventilation is not always allowed. There's some nuances to that. You can use specific types of energy recovery ventilation in very specific situations, but we wanted to keep this simple, so we left the exception broad. We wanted to make sure that we address this, this specific design situation. We also exempt any electric resistance in building that comply with C407 or Appendix TE, recognizing that these modeling methodologies would make it difficult to comply if you had a lot of electric resistance. So that becomes a way to design your way through this proposal with just smart application of electric resistance. And then of course, any electric resistance that's used as supplementary heat in accordance with the section C403.4.11, which is an existing set of regulations, but that has been modified so that it doesn't just apply to electric resistance. It can also apply to any heat system that is used for supplementary heat. So this ensures that they're only being used as backup, because that's what this section is intended to do. Number 5 is intended to address the application of variable air volume systems with terminal heat, electric resistance heat. The working group really felt like this was a reasonable approach to get an all-electric building. It is a simple and straightforward design that's used in a lot of buildings. They wanted to have a prescriptive path through, but recognized that they also wanted to see it designed so that it wasn't using a lot of electric resistance heat. So that's where this 5 watts of electric resistance space heating per square foot of conditioned floor area comes in. We might be discussing this a little bit more later. This ensures that when you have a VAV running with a heat pump as the central unit, that you have to configure it to avoid electric resistance as much as possible. And then, of course, any electric resistance heating elements integrated into heat pump equipment, want to be abundantly clear that that is still allowed. And then replacement gas-fired furnace equipment that complies with the section in Chapter 5, which addresses replacement systems. And this one is put in place, as Katrina hinted to, that we want to regulate those through Energize Denver, which is really looking specifically at replacements, and that will be tailored specifically for those replacement applications. So Katrina, should we entertain questions on this one, or did you want to go through water heating first?
I think,
So,
yeah, go ahead, Eric.
real quick.
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to make a motion to hear both this proposal and the other commercial proposal for electrification simultaneously, but to vote on them separately.
Sure, thanks. I was just going to ask if someone wanted to do that because that's what we mentioned we wanted to do. So can we get a set? Does someone want to second that? And then we'll vote to make sure as a committee we want to do that. Courtney, go ahead.
I'll second that. Thank you.
Okay, great. So there's a motion to hear item number P40 and P38 together, but to vote on them separately. Call a vote. All those in favor of doing that, please raise your hand. P14, 15, go ahead and lower your hands. All hands are down. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those that's abstaining, please raise your hand. 0. Okay, so we will hear both of these introduced together, and then we will move for discussion separately. So Sean and Katrina, do you want to go ahead and go to item P38?
Katrina, was there anything you wanted to add before we jump into the technical details?
No, nothing to add.
All right, just want to make sure. So this will look very familiar to, look very similar to the last one. A lot of the same principles are behind it, aligning that fundamental requirements, fossil fuel and electric resistance, instantaneous and storage water heating equipment shall not be used to provide service hot water. So this is that alignment that we talked about with Energize Denver, and then the exceptions then become the really important part. This is where we nail down where there are reasonable times to use, particularly electric resistance. Oh, thank you. I'm still sharing the wrong one. Let me share the right one. All right. Oh, still the wrong one. I apologize. I think I have too many things open. All right, are we the right one now? Okay, I'm seeing a couple of nods.
Yes.
Thank you for catching that. So in this one, we see very similar exceptions, resistance heating elements that are integrated into heat pump water heating equipment. Want to be clear about that. Also, electric resistance elements used for recirculation loop temperature maintenance. This is typically heat trace, but there might be other applications. The idea is that we want to have these specialized heating elements where it's just keeping the warm water warm and it's not the primary system, that we still want to allow that kind of flexibility. Any electric storage water heaters with a rated storage volume no greater than 20 gallons. So this allows electric resistance for these pony water heaters. You might see these on a lavatory or as a boost heater at the end of line. You know, so there aren't good heat pump alternatives for these right now, and the loads are fairly small, so it is reasonable to have an exception for these. Instantaneous electric water heaters, when they're within 10 feet of the point of use. The working group discussed this one about that these instantaneous water heaters can actually be a very effective, very efficient way to heat water, especially when they are close to their point of use, and wanted to make sure that those were allowed. And through discussion fell on that 10 feet. That's close enough that you're not doing, you're not losing a lot of hot water or a long wait time to get the hot water, but it also doesn't require it to be so close that you're triggering requirements for GFCI for this equipment, because there are those requirements in the electrical code. It excludes, number 5 is really for clarity. It's not strictly necessary, but sometimes we put these things in for extra clarity, that it excludes hot water storage tanks. And it's clear, that these are, if they don't have electric resistance or fossil fuel heating elements. So these are the indirect water storage tanks that you might see in a boiler system or in a heat pump water heater system, that they are really just meant to hold the hot water. And then we also have an exception for electric resistance equipment when there's 100% of the annual service water heating is provided by on-site renewables. This aligns again with Energize Denver, that if you've got the on-site renewables, then you can go ahead and do electric resistance. It is clear that that system can't be used to meet any other provision of the code so that people aren't double counting. It exempts water heating systems that serve basically process loads. And so these are end uses that require a water temperature of 141 degrees Fahrenheit or hotter. The working group, originally this was at 180. The working group brought this down to 141 just because that's where the equipment actually breaks, is up to 140 and then everything over 140. And then electric resistance water heating equipment, where 75% of the annual service water heating requirement is met by solar thermal systems. So this gets to, if you have a solar thermal system, you can have electric resistance as the backup for solar thermal. This was, while not a common system, a couple of working group members did think that it was important to make sure that these very efficient systems are still allowed. Again, we have the exception for buildings that go through C407 or Appendix ET, recognizing that those modeling methodologies will inherently control the energy cost or energy use through electric resistance. And then finally, the last one is that replacement provision, which is just like the space heating provision, making sure that replacements are covered in Chapter 5, where it's really fine-tuned for replacement situations. So I am happy to answer any questions about either of these proposals.
Okay, thank you. I do want to give Christine option to speak since she was the original proponent of these. Do you have anything else to add? Let's see her hand going up and she's not going off mute. So we will take that as, oh, did I hear something?
Never mind. I didn't, I think she went off mute, but maybe she's not there.
Okay, I don't see, I see her online there, but we'll give her a few minutes. Chuck, if you can hold tight, our first order of business is going to the general public. So Sean, I'm gonna stop your screen share real quick. Okay, and so can we see the agenda on the screen? A little head nod if yes. Okay, cool. So I'll go to the general public. We are going to have, just to keep some order so that the committee and everybody knows which proposal we're talking about, we're going to split this up into P40, commercial partial electrical space heating, electrification space heating, and then we will have comments on the P38. So anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of item P40, partial electrification for space heating, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. I do see some hands up. Mr. Clark, welcome. You are allowed to speak. Please introduce yourself for those who don't know you, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me, my audio?
Yes, we can.
Great. And I'm actually going to make my comments on both of them, if that's acceptable, on 38 and 40.
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm Joel Clark. I am a member of the Denver City Council. And as you are deliberating these proposals, I just wanted to make sure to highlight where the mayor and city council are when it comes to combating climate change. The mayor had his state of the city on this Monday, just yesterday. And so I just want to quote a couple of things that the mayor said. So I'm not just putting words in his mouth. These were his words. Humanity has reached a crisis point in the fight against climate change, and the people who will suffer the most are the families and neighbors that are already the most vulnerable. Every day, every hour, every minute we delay means we are sacrificing our children's future. This is an unacceptable injustice. We can and must do better. And then he ended that portion of his speech by saying it is not an exaggeration to say that this is a race to save our future. It's a race we cannot afford to lose. City Council, for our part, has been leading the way with the creation of the Climate Office and the creation of the Climate Action Fund. But specific to what you're considering with this code, which will ultimately be advanced to Council for approval, Council voted unanimously to pass Energize Denver for existing buildings. It is imperative that you pass these electrification proposals. Denver City Council will not approve anything that is forwarded to us that does not put new buildings ahead of existing buildings based on what was in the Energize Denver ordinance. The council unanimously approved Energize for existing buildings with the understanding that new buildings would be addressed through this process and would lead the way, staying ahead of existing buildings on electrification. So I just wanted to flag that for you and implore you to please pass these and advance to City Council a code that we can be excited to pass. Thank you very much for all of the time that you all put into this, for your service to our city in doing this work. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today on these issues.
All right, thank you. And you did it within under 2 minutes, great. Next hand up in support, we have Johnny. Johnny, please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Hello, everybody. My name is Johnny Kocher with Rocky Mountain Institute. I'm here to speak in favor of these two proposals. RMI generally supports proposals that move towards building electrification. We believe that these two proposals, which would require commercial buildings to electrify space and water heating for furnaces and gas water heaters, is a great step forward for the city of Denver. RMI has done an analysis for the city of Denver on single family homes and found that there is a 25% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over a 15-year period when switching to all electric technologies. We also found a $2,900 savings in net present cost, which basically includes both utility costs and upfront costs. So, and I believe Group 14 also did an analysis on office buildings in the city of Denver and found that it was less expensive to build an office building in the city of Denver as well. So we believe that this is a great step forward and are in support, and urge everybody to vote in favor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I do have a chat. Christine has made it back on. So Christine, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and let us hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to leave my video off because my Wi-Fi is unstable. Tell me if I start breaking up again, but I wanted to appreciate the hard work that the committee has done, especially in the subgroup meetings, to work out all the complicated details of these proposals. As you know, our intention was always to make sure that as many buildings as possible moved straight to high efficiency electric systems, notably heat pump based systems. And I think this does accomplish that goal. We are definitely in support of proposals and the revisions that favor much lower emissions from buildings, and we're in support of constructing buildings right the first time, and that makes sure that buildings aren't putting in equipment that's obsolete in 5 to 10 years, and it involves making sure the technology isn't inadvertently harming the workers, the neighborhood, or the climate through avoidable pollution. And finally, we're in support of proposals and revisions that go along with this that at least require a much higher degree of energy efficiency for buildings that cannot go all electric at this particular juncture. I would love the proposals to go much further given the climate imperative, but again, I'm really grateful for the time and attention to getting these proposals to where they are. So I would love a favorable vote. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Okay, second call for anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody that wants to speak in support of item P40, please raise your hand. Okay, all those that want to speak in opposition of item P40 from the general public, please raise your hand. Mark, please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes to do so.
Hello. Hang on a second. There we go. Hello, I'm Mark Jelinski, Chief Mechanical Engineer with the RMH Group. As many of you know, I've been providing my 2 cents during this process via the public comments, and also I participated in the working groups on this and the service water heater proposal. I've spoken in favor of all the proposals in my previous comments, looking only to make them enforceable and workable. This is the first time I've come out in opposition to one of these. This is because this proposal relies on picking winners and losers for space heating technologies. For instance, furnaces are verboten, but not boilers. Hydrotherm systems, where you can use the water heater as a heating source, is not is still allowed. What about gas unit heaters or gas radiant heaters that we see in service bays and open spaces like that? Is that a furnace? Where do those fit in? And why is the difference needed? I believe that C406 provisions provide for the appropriate incentives and disincentives for designers to avoid non-all-electric buildings. This plus building performance benchmarks and targets will drive the designs of new buildings to meet Denver's climate goals without a sledgehammer approach. I recommend that this code allow for us smart designers to develop all-electric buildings or be forced to pull out the energy conservation stops required to meet C406, which is very tough. The working group did a great job of addressing the many design condition issues, accommodating many of the stakeholders' concerns. If this must pass, I recommend that it not be modified too much. As a final thought regarding the Group 14 study, this was very, very limited based on small equipment and nowhere near covers the issues seen in large commercial designs.
Right, thank you, Mark. Second call for anybody that wants to speak in opposition from the general public on item P40, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition on item P40, please raise your hand. Being none, I will now go to item P38. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of item P38, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of item P38, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of item P38, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of item P38, please raise your hand. I see a hand up. Mark, go ahead. You'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mark Jelinski, Chief Mechanical Engineer, RMH Group. Same preamble, really want to, and if I didn't say it enough before, I really am in favor of all these things. We really do need to meet these goals. I'm in opposition to this particular one, similar to the last one, because it's again picking winners and losers, and it does so poorly. It's acceptable to have a 250 MBH gas-fired boiler external to a storage tank, but a storage tank with an integral 250 MBH gas-fired boiler is not allowed. The most efficient gas-fired surface water heating system is specifically excluded. For any decent-sized hot water heating system, the most efficient gas-fired water heater system is an instantaneous type that takes the cold water directly from the source at 50 degrees or so, and then heats it to the final temperature. This allows the condensing features of that boiler, the instantaneous gas water heater that were well engineered into it to actually condense and actually get the plus 90% efficiency that it's getting. When you hook up a high efficiency gas furnace or boiler to a storage tank and start recirculating the water from 120 back up to 140 just to keep the temperature maintained, you lose all the benefits of the condensing side of a boiler like that. So this is again allowing for the lesser efficient gas-fired water heater systems, and for whatever reason, allowing them external to the storage tank, but not internal to the storage tank. So anyway, we are smart. We will be able to figure this out. We can use C406. And I also acknowledge it in many of my large building designs, I'm going to be doing a lot more modeling than before. I'm still trying to maintain an easy prescriptive path here. And unfortunately, I don't think this is it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. I'll do second call for anybody who wants to speak in opposition of item P38 from the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition of item P38 from the general public, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no more, we will go back to the committee. We'll, just like we did with the general public, we'll split this up into two different categories, P40 and then P38. So I'll ask at this time, anybody from the committee have any questions on item P40 for the proponent or the subject matter experts? Anybody from the committee have any questions? Courtney, go ahead.
Thank you. Sean, I wanted to acknowledge Mark Johnski's detailed, technical questions related to these two proposals. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the decisions made and why we got here and address some of his concerns. Thank you.
Sure. I think the key thing to keep in mind is that this is building off of Energize Denver, where these decisions for replacements have already been made. So one of the driving concerns is the idea of building a new building that doesn't meet the same goals that existing buildings will have to in their retrofit within just a couple of years. And so when we look at the opportunities for instantaneous water heaters or some particular pieces of equipment that might still be allowed, I think that that is kind of the key framing, that what we are looking at first are the systems with the most straightforward electrification path. So it's not so much comparing a gas boiler to a gas instantaneous water heater. It's more comparing an instantaneous gas water heater to heat pump technology. And so I think that that's the key element, is replacing as many systems as possible, as early as possible, with heat pump equipment, rather than just trying to go to, well, here's the most efficient, gas option that's available. We could reconfigure the system to design it this way and get a slightly more efficient gas system, is to get those from gas to electric instead. And so I think that's the key thing to keep in mind, is what is actually being chosen between, not necessarily one gas system and another through this path, but one gas system and the electric alternative.
Okay, thank you. Next question on item P40 comes from Jamie.
What is Appendix TE? Mentioned in exception number 3.
Sure. Appendix TE is the modeling to an energy target, which is the one of the modeling paths that the committee approved in the last meeting. So this is an EUI target. It's only available for certain building types that you have to model to.
Got it. Thanks, Sean.
Okay, next question from item P40 comes from Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was actually going to expand on Jamie's question. Appendix T, it's referred to as Appendix TE in this proposal, and then in the water heating, it's referred to as Appendix ET, like the movie. And then so just a clarification there, which I don't know if it's TE or ET. But as far as a question on Amendment 40, we have provided that flexibility for projects that might need that flexibility with water heating and allowing gas water heating, which I think helps address some of Mark's concerns in the water heating proposal, but we have not provided for that in this proposal. And I'm wondering why exception 3 here only allows flexibility with the electric resistance and not the gas. Because the water heating proposal gives you flexibility with both.
Right, so I'm gonna make sure that I'm understanding.
Yeah, so if I compare exception 3 between the two proposals, so one of them is the name of the appendix, TE or ET, and the other one is that the water heating does not limit that flexibility to electric resistance. Oh, sorry, it's not number 3 in this proposal, it's number 9. So if we compare, yeah, exception 9 in the water heating proposal to exception 3 in the space heating proposal, would the proponent allow those to match? And I think that might help to ease some concerns in all of the what ifs, where you're still allowing some flexibility while still meeting Denver's goals.
Mm-hmm. So since the working group worked these up separately, I'm actually not sure why those two are different and if maybe 9 was meant to be only for electric buildings or not. So that's something that the committee can certainly discuss, and I can check and make sure that we get the right phrasing for the appendix name. It's one of them is right and the other one is wrong. We can make sure that it's right in both of them.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. So going back to, we're on item P40 next, and we're in the question period. So the next question comes from Chuck K. Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, just a general question. So it seemed like Mark Jelinski was certainly in favor of the overall thrust of electrification, but had some, specific concerns about minor details. And so I wonder if, he could propose amendments, but it doesn't look like he's on the call anymore. So, but I just thought I'd bring that up.
I think
okay.
Mark's...
So Chuck, to answer, just real quick, to answer Chuck's question on that, since he is not a committee member, he cannot propose any modifications. However, the committee can on his behalf, but him speaking from the general public cannot do that.
Yeah, I understand that. It just seems like it would have been worth a discussion with him to see if there are any changes that the committee could propose that would make him more comfortable with it.
Sure. Noted. Just so you know, he will have a minute for a rebuttal on both of these. So maybe he will do so during that minute, and the committee can consider some of those. Any other questions, Chuck?
No, not on this one. No, the next one later. The hot water one, I'll have a comment.
Okay, great. Next question for P40 comes from Jamie.
Yeah, I want to dive into exception 5 and understand what that means a little more so. I mean, specifically, are you saying that 5 watts per square foot is allowed? Is there any constraint on that?
So yes, the way that it's worded is that it is allowed, and the working group, as they were discussing this, felt that 5 watts is not enough to just do electric resistance heating of most buildings unless they have a really good envelope, and that it would only be enough for heating at terminal boxes. And then it would only be enough if those terminal boxes were already tuned so that they were delivering air at a higher temperature. So oftentimes VAV systems are set to deliver, air that isn't as warm, and they depend more on their terminal boxes to get it up to final temperature. So there was discussion about, how much it would be, that it would be closer to 14 watts for a typical VAV system in Denver for that kind of approach if you weren't bringing the supply air to a higher temperature. So 5 watts was kind of seen as that. If we're going to do this prescriptively, it's enough energy to allow VAV with reheat when it's done efficiently, but not so much that you allow someone to just do electric resistance.
So a couple questions then, and maybe Chuck or somebody or Eric wants to jump in. Like, how do you document that? So I'm doing a VAV job with electric resistance, preheat at the box. Am I tallying up all of that and saying, okay, here's my conditioned floor area and I'm under that? Anytime I do a vestibule or a stairwell heater and throw in electric resistance because there's no hydronic system nearby and I don't want to put glycol in the loop for freeze protection, like what does that look like?
So in terms of compliance, it does look like what you mentioned. You would need to tally up, all of your sources of electric resistance heat. You might have some of these other minor loads that you mentioned, so stairwell heating or freeze protection in a storage room, that those might be electric resistance as well. Those could be handled under this same budget, but you would tally up all of it, and then you would multiply this 5 watts by your conditioned floor area, and that would be your budget. And so if the capacity of your electric resistance was above that, you wouldn't qualify for this exception. You would have to design it down. And how you design it down is left up to the designer. What you can do to lower the amount of electric resistance capacity equipment to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, that'd be up to the designer to figure out how to do that. So it really should be seen as a budget.
Okay. How about heated plenums above parking spaces or heat trace? Is that in this? And what is the conditioned floor area? Because it's a parking structure. What are we doing for those nuances?
So you're talking about just heating delivered to the plenum space, and as opposed
a
to,
lot of times in Denver, they just like to just drop a ceiling in there and heat the entire piping underneath the floor that's conditioned above it, but you're in the parking structure.
So in that case, you'd be talking about
electric unit heaters in that space.
Oh, so creating a heated space so that they don't have to heat the water? Is that the
for freeze protection? Yes.
For freeze protection. So they would be allowed to do it as long as it's under this same limit, the way that it's written. So when you do have these kind of alternative designs, even though this limit was created with the intention of serving VAV, it's not limited the way that the working group came to the terminology. So something that like that could be allowed. And then if it was actual heat trace applied to the pipes, that would fall under the surface water heating section, not under this one. But what you were just talking about, heating the plenum, would fall under this.
Okay, thanks.
All right, next question on P40 is Ken.
Kind of building on Jamie's question, I guess that part, exception 5, it says not including supplementary heat. And I just wanted some clarification on that, Sean, if you could clarify specifically which supplementary heat you were talking about there.
So in this case, it's supplementary. So any heat, any system that is controlled as supplementary heat. And so we see the C403.4.1.1 fairly well nested down there below. So there are control requirements along that. So you can have it for supplementary heat, which is really meant to be for when your primary heat pump just can't keep up, which does happen sometimes, and maybe a cold snap, or because something else has malfunctioned in the system. So that doesn't include anything that's supplementary heat, but to count as supplementary heat, you have to control it in this way so that it really does effectively become backup heat and not hybrid. I think that might be the way to think of the VAV, is that it's this VAV with terminal heat could be considered a hybrid heat pump electric resistance system where they're working together.
That's what's so challenging about supplemental heat pump heat. It's not necessarily a failure mode. They're usually kicking on, depending on the manufacturer, somewhere below 30 degrees. And that's a pretty big window. And I wouldn't necessarily call that supplementary or backup per se. I'll also think on a way to maybe clean that up here with the language. Thank you.
There were discussions about creating a temperature threshold for when supplementary heat could be triggered on, and the working group had trouble with that because for some heat pumps, that, what was reasonable for some heat pumps was not reasonable for other heat pump systems.
Agreed.
Thank you. Third and final call, or last call, I should say, for any questions on item P40 from the committee. Chuck B, go ahead.
Yeah, I just sort of wanted to address, I guess, Mark's comments and Chuck's comments. That Mark's comments about picking winners and losers, that this proposal does address just furnaces. And I think the unit heaters is an interesting, how are we addressing unit heaters? And then allowing boilers to still heat entire loops of buildings. So we're allowing gas, we're allowing whole high rises to be built using a gas system still. And so I think it is sort of picking winners and losers. And I do have concerns with this proposal on that topic. And then another small item is just in the C403.4.1.1, we've crossed out electric resistance. And I guess that would be more for Sean. Do we still need to cross out electric resistance in that proposal? Because I think originally the idea was to encourage the use of heat pumps and allowing gas as the backup, but then, or as supplementary, but now the gas is being prohibited. Do we still need to delete the electric resistance from that section?
So it does still allow gas to be used as supplementary. And so that's why it was configured that way, of crossing out the electric resistance. That is maybe less important in new construction, but will be more important for the existing building section. But it does still, that has been something that has stayed as part of the proposal as it has gone through. In terms of the picking winners and losers, the committee and the working group was always apprehensive about going to full electrification for either space heating or for water heating. And so this really does dial back to what is already being required for existing buildings at about the same time. So yes, it, in some ways, I guess you could see it as picking winners and losers. However, the other thing that it does is that it ensures that no buildings will be built that will be requiring expensive retrofits at their first equipment replacement. Setting them up for a system replacement under Energize Denver, and only getting one service cycle out of these certain pieces of gas equipment, which are going to be prohibited in replacements, at the same time that these are being built.
Okay, next question comes from Ken.
Just wanted to add to what Sean was saying there. I think Mark brought up some really good concerns. That being said, I feel like with some modifications later to push us towards some of the building compliance through the C407, I think it's a way to work around some of those items. My opinion as an engineer, warm air furnaces, I think that's a really great opportunity to start with electrification. There are many more opportunities for heat pump technology in that realm than there are, say, swapping out boilers. That opens up a very significant complication. Not that it's not doable. I'm sure both Mark and I have engineered many of those, but this is definitely a good place to start. I does kind of feel a little bit like picking winners and losers, but I think that it's better than nothing, although I think that we should continue to strive for additional opportunities. I just wanted to comment that I think it is a lot more doable here.
Okay, item P40, questions, Jamie?
I can't remember what my question was. Come back to you. Thanks.
Okay, we'll come back. There'll be an opportunity for further discussion later on. So, all right, so that's item P40. I'm just trying to keep everything straight in terms of discussions. We will now jump to item P38 on questions from the committee to the proponent. for the subject matter experts. Any questions on item P38? Chuck K.
Yeah, I have a question. I wanted to preface it with just a general statement. You know, a representative Denver before said that, you know, climate change is an emergency, and I very, very much believe that. So I think we are at a point where it does make sense for a government with proper input from engineers, experienced engineers, to pick winners. I hate to see the government pick losers, but I think it is appropriate to pick winners. So just wanted to make that statement. I have just a general question about the case of domestic hot water, and that is, was any consideration given to using a mixing valve so that, you know, scalding temperatures can be avoided, but the storage water can be run up to higher temperatures to allow greater storage for demand response capability? I'm wondering if that was considered.
So the issue of raising tank temperature in order to increase the capacity on heat pump equipment was discussed, but there wasn't any discussion of actually including thermostatic mixing valves as a requirement, or here in the energy code, or requiring higher tank storage temperatures in general. I have not looked at Denver's plumbing code, but I know some plumbing codes do require a thermostatic mixing valve if the storage temperature is above a certain temperature. We could check to see if that's the case in Denver.
I think Excel requires it for qualification for a heat pump water heater rebate, I believe.
Okay.
They do. I'll add that they do.
Okay. So Chuck answered Chuck's questions. All right, Chuck, if you don't have anything else, we'll go to the next question in item P38, which comes from Jamie.
So my question, kind of back to the other one and this one as well, was I'm trying to pull up other code proposals and trying to remember where we were with allowing gas, but then requiring electrification for future replacement. So for a number of the things that Mark raised or Ken raised, what is the requirement that we approved that we would allow that, but you have to put in something that future-proofs that location and that equipment? And that applies to 38 and 40.
So there is a proposal for electrification readiness, and that does help with the cost of doing electrification retrofits in the future. It does address some of the issues, but mostly around electrical capacity. It won't address any of the other issues that you sometimes will encounter with doing electrification retrofits, like you don't have the physical space for the equipment, or you have to move the equipment somewhere else. So while electrification readiness requirements, like the proposals for Denver, do help and are important, they don't fully address the issue that these buildings that are built under this code, you know, if they have a furnace or an instantaneous water heater or a storage water heater, that those pieces of equipment, if they're electric resistance or fossil fuel, will have to be replaced with heat pump technology at their first failure.
Okay, but I guess I'm more interested in the boiler situations and the other more complicated ones where if we're mixing gas furnaces in this proposal in 40 and 38, so be it. But for the gas exemptions that we're allowing in either this one or the other, what is the future proofing that we're mandating to make that so one that it complies with the future energized Denver ordinances, or just any other common sense electrification down the road?
And so that's what the electrification readiness proposals do. And like I said, they do provide limited future proofing, but not full future proofing, particularly with larger pieces of equipment. There's kind of less that you can do to future proof for the electrification of larger pieces of equipment. Energize Denver was really driven by what are the cost-effective pieces of equipment to electrify now, as you know, which captured some of the technical issues, but it was really a cost-driven set of determinations.
I guess I'd be curious to know what Mark's thoughts are on if that suffices, I guess, if you're picking winners and losers, but the winners that we don't actually want in perpetuity, the other code amendment would actually put in the requirements that would allow that to be easily retrofitted in the future, and not putting the owners in a box where they would be unable, or they might have electrical service, but you've physically not given them the space requirements or other things where they could actually accommodate it. So I don't, we'd have to look at that to see, you have to compare the two pieces, that what did you pick here and did you cover it on the other side?
And most of these proposals are stepwise. Energize Denver does include electrification of boilers, but that is farther down the road. So that those, you know, don't come into play until 2027, I believe. And the solutions for, you know, either electrify now or electrification readiness, as we went through the process, just the committee did not feel were code ready. So it is that tension that you have Energize Denver, which is going to require retrofits in the future. And then how much can you avoid that by requiring electrification in new buildings now?
Okay, thank you. Next question on item P38 comes from Elizabeth.
Yeah, did the committee discuss how like process water heating, like swimming pools, might fit into this, as we don't really have good options for swimming pool boilers that would comply with this prescriptively?
This doesn't apply to boilers.
Don't boilers count as water heating equipment?
They do, but they don't count as instantaneous or storage water heating equipment. So the title says water heating equipment, but the text of the code proposal gives the specific water heating equipment that it applies to. In general, section headings in codes are not enforced. They're not, that's not enforceable language. It's just the content itself.
Could you expand on that a little more? Like if I read this, I don't read it that way.
So it says
something.
Fossil fuel and electric resistance, instantaneous and storage water heating equipment. Those are two specific kinds of water heating equipment, and boiler doesn't fall under either of those.
Okay, thank you.
Next question comes from Ken.
Just to address what Elizabeth said, I think maybe adding the word service water heating might clarify that. It's my interpretation, Sean, that this is all service water heating related items.
It is, yes.
I'll propose an amendment for that later.
All right, thanks. Next question comes from Courtney.
Thank you. To kind of come back to an earlier conversation we had, this exception 9. Sean, can you remind us what the intent of this exception was? I believe it was for electric resistance, so that we're not allowing gas through this path. But I just, if we can spend a minute or two on this, revisiting that, just so we're not allowing a big loophole here.
I believe that that was the intention, and that may have just gotten missed as the working group was going through all of the language additions and modifications. I'll also note that the appendix that it's referring to also got changed through that working group process, and they just didn't get synced up. So it's Appendix PT is what it ended up being adopted as. So that for performance target. So we would want to sync these up, make sure that it references, instead of ET or TE, that it references PT, because that's the appendix that was voted by the committee.
Thank you. Kim, I see your hand up. Did you have another question? Oh, okay. All right, so that's the end of the question period for both these items, P40 and P38. We'll now go back to the general public for rebuttals, and we will do it in the same order. We'll do one at a time. So anybody from the general public that wants to speak in rebuttal of support of item P40, please raise your hand. Anybody in the general public that wants to have a rebuttal in support of item P40, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak or have a rebuttal in opposition from the general public on item P40, please raise your hand. Mark, you will have 1 minute to speak.
Hi, thanks. Since you brought my name up in these things, I'll respond to a couple of those. First of all, Chuck K. Actually, I did get in a lot of plenty of input. I participated in all 4 of the working group members. That's why I say that if this has to pass, I think it's done pretty well. I gotta say, it's still picking winners and losers, and there's still in both of these, there's going to be interpretation issues that, well, Chuck K or Chuck B will just have to work through. And for Chuck B, you asked about why the electric, I think it was number 7 here. We were trying to address hybrid rooftop units, gas furnaces with heat pump refrigeration under supplementary heat. That's what it was. So this would allow for what's currently market-ready technology, a hybrid rooftop unit, to use its gas heater only for supplemental heat.
Thank you, Mark. I'll put you back on mute. Second call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak, have a rebuttal in opposition on item P40, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody that has a rebuttal in opposition on P40, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we will go to item P38. Any rebuttals in support from the general public, please raise your hand. Second call for rebuttals, or third call for rebuttals and support. Seeing none, we'll go to opposition. Anybody who wants to have a rebuttal in opposition for item P38, please raise your hand. Mark, you will have 1 minute.
Again, similarly, I'm still would prefer that we, if anything, what I'm calling for here, by the way, is make my job a little bit more difficult. I'm asking you to make me pull, if I need to put in a gas-fired something or another, to make me pull out the stops and use C406. I still have to do that. Even if I use a boiler in, because it's allowed in one of these, I still have to pull out the stops and meet C406, because I'm not an all-electric building. So why just make me meet C406? Elizabeth, this is an interesting point that you brought up about pools. Now, this does not cover a boiler which just heats water in a small pipe rather than a large pipe like a storage water heater. Doing the same thing, but service water heating is defined as anything that's not space heating. So this has always been a question: does pool heaters include? Is that in the service water heating section? So it's interesting.
All right, thank you, Mark. Second call for rebuttals in opposition of this proposal P38 from the general public. Please raise your hand. Third and final call, any rebuttals in opposition? Seeing none, I go back to the committee now. Committee, just to keep a little bit of order, let's start, let's break these up discussion-wise and modification-wise or motion-wise. Let's start with item P40. So this is your opportunity for item P40 to have further discussion or to make a motion. Ken, go ahead.
I'd like to kind of get apples to apples between the two amendments. So I think changing exception, make sure I get it right here, 3 of this particular one, where it says electric resistance in buildings that comply. I think we should just change that to buildings that comply. And that kind of pushes a lot more than just electric resistance into that performance alternative. And then I also think it would help to maybe clarify in exception 5, where I want to include the word budget in there. Maybe it's an allowance or a budget up to 5 watts of electric resistance space heating per square foot. Yeah, a budget up to, I think might help clarify that language a little bit. Sean, you kind of used that word budget, and I like that.
Okay, Ken, so you have 2 motions here, one for item 3 to get rid of electric resistance in, and one for item 5 exception to add a budget. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So there's a motion to make a modification. Courtney, go ahead.
Thank you. This is kind of a bit of a conversation with Ken. I feel like we might have reversed what we want to do in exception 3 for what we want to do in exception 9, because this would allow gas building, like this is an exception. So it would, I think we want to modify water heating proposal exception 9, not this exception 3, because then it would allow gas within the modeling and it wouldn't be restricted to electric resistance. Does that make sense? We're kind of doing a couple negatives.
Yeah, I guess that does make sense.
And then
make sure maybe I was thinking through that the wrong way.
I get what you're saying. I think it's just the opposite, because then this wouldn't be leading Energized Denver. It would kind of be going backwards. So would you be open to keeping this one and then we can talk about the next proposal?
Yeah, you're right. I think I did state that wrong. I guess I'm making it less restrictive, and I could see the argument of leaving it the way it is and changing the other one.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay, Ken, so you're withdrawing the modification on item 3, but keeping number 5, correct?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay. All right, so there's a motion to modify exception number 5 by adding a budget. Anybody else? Do we have a second on that? Courtney, go ahead.
It might have to be Eric, but I will second that.
Okay. Eric?
You've got it taken care of. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so there's a motion and a second. So I'll call a vote. All those in favor of modifying exception number 5 to add the terms a budget to it in front of the beginning sentence. All those in favor, please raise your hand. The 14, 15, 16. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. I think we're up to 16 voting members, but just to make sure, all those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 1. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands.
I'm sorry, Kevin, this is Mark. You
All
can
right.
add before. Sorry.
Say that again.
You can ask me as an in support. I missed my hand.
Support. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, Eric, go ahead.
Thank you. As a point of clarification in the remodification of exception number 3, the original language was electric resistance in buildings that comply with C407 or Appendix PT. Great. Okay. The in. Yep. Thank you very much. That's what I was looking for.
Thank you for catching that. And just a point of reference, I did already, since it was clerical, update the appendix on both items P40 and P38 to PT. Okay, any other discussion or motions on item P40? Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question on, and maybe this is a code question that Sean can answer, and it has to do with the heated plenum question. Does heated plenum contribute to the total conditioned floor area allowance? Or do we need to add some type of additional words there that would allow that as extra? Did that question make sense?
I think so. So right now the exception is based on the conditioned floor area, but there's no restriction on where it's used. So it's a building level budget that's based on the total conditioned floor area in the building.
So what I'm asking though, does plenum area count as conditioned floor area?
That's a good question. Maybe Chuck can answer it.
Because I would consider it as conditioned space, but it's not occupied floor area, right? Like I have to model that plenum floor. It has a floor and it has walls, but does that count as conditioned floor area in the eyes of the IECC?
Any subject matter experts? Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. I was gonna say, I mean, it's going to depend on where you define your thermal envelope boundary. I mean, is your plenum within the thermal envelope or outside of the thermal envelope?
It's within the thermal envelope. If it's heated, it is, right? So then, like, does the plenum have a floor area and the floor above have a floor area? Like, does the plenum count as conditioned floor area, I guess?
No,
I would think it would.
Double counting the area.
Right. My model thinks it does. I always have to break it out if my plenums are conditioned. So, I mean, I would think it does, but does it make sense to add some type of clarification if the definition here that's highlighted of conditioned floor area is not explicit in that respect? And I guess what I'm suggesting is that it should count as conditioned floor area, such that, you know, if you've got a heated plenum, now I've got extra floor area that is conditioned, versus if I don't have a heated plenum, right? Does that make sense?
So tracking the definitions as they're used in the IECC, a plenum would only be considered conditioned floor area if it were constructed with a floor, in which case you probably wouldn't consider it a plenum. So for something to be a conditioned space, it has to have a floor. And so for something to be conditioned floor area, it's only the conditioned spaces count as conditioned floor area. Conditioned spaces have to have floors.
So it has a floor in the sense of a thermal envelope, because that is a floor surface area. It doesn't have a floor that I can walk on, but it is still part of my thermal envelope as a floor. Is it in that sense? Maybe it would just help to just add a clarification here or add another line item or something for heated plenums or something like that.
So if a line item is added for the plenum area, that would basically it would give an increased budget to all buildings that had heated plenums. So I think there would need to be the discussion of whether that is a desirable thing or not. to give a bonus for those who choose to keep pipes warm with a heated plenum.
Yeah, that would be my proposal because I don't have good alternatives to that scenario.
If that is in the intent, a cleaner approach might be to just exempt heated plenums from
I like that.
electric resistance in heated plenums, if that is your intention, and let the committee decide whether they want to allow it.
Okay, I would like to propose that as an option, and partly because we've done a lot of modeling, and back in my group 14 days they actually did some testing. Those plenum heaters hardly ever turn on, so we're not talking about a lot of electric resistance usage. So I think it would be fair to allow that as an exception because it really doesn't impact, have significant impacts in our total goals here.
Okay, Elizabeth, did I get that correctly on the screen? You want to add another exemption that reads electric resistance in heated plenums?
Yeah, I think that's good, unless other folks have suggestions on better ways to clarify that. Ken, Jamie, thoughts?
Let them ponder that, but Jamie, go ahead.
We're already excluding heat trace, right?
In the water heating proposal, yes, heat trace would be.
Well, so if my alternative was to basically heat trace all of the piping in that plenum, or not do a plenum and just heat trace everything, if it's excluded there, then I don't see a huge difference in providing the exclusion here. That makes sense.
Okay, we'll go to Ken and we'll come back. Elizabeth still has a motion on the table there, and it will need a second at some point if we want to vote on that. But Ken, go ahead.
I like the language for electric resistance in heated plenums. I guess a question on the heat trace exclusion. Since these are so in parallel, I guess this is a question about the next one. Just because Sean, you said it is excluded in the other one, and I think we should clarify and add it here too, because again, I see the other one relating to surface water heating, where this might be a more broader space heating, which would include a broader definition of heat trace. John, can you clarify where that exception is for heat trace?
So it would fall under the exception where it says, oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. Electric resistance elements used for recirculation loop temperature maintenance. So it doesn't specifically call out heat trace because the working group wanted to just describe it rather than define it.
Okay, well then I guess this is a question then for this one, because that I think is a different type of electric heat tracing. I guess I'm more specifically speaking to freeze protection, which is kind of why we added this heated plenum. I think I would like to propose that we add another exception that just says heat trace for freeze protection. There's a very, very specific application.
So heat trace that's applied to the pipes for freeze protection is not space heating or surface water heating. And so it wouldn't be captured by either of these. However,
that's fair.
Like we've said on some other things, sometimes we include language that isn't necessary in order to have absolute clarity.
I kind of feel like we should add language for absolute clarity, but that's just me. So I'd like to propose that, and I guess I'd like to hear from the committee if they disagree with that. So,
although that would be on the other proposal, that wouldn't be on the space heating one.
And I guess why would that be the case? I guess you could see heat trace all over, primarily for domestic. I suppose it could go on. I'm open to suggestions from the committee if they feel there's a better spot to put this.
Okay, for the time being,
Sean.
Ken, we'll put that on pause. Did someone have a comment?
Can Sean or someone point us to the other exception? I'm trying to find it and I can't.
So it is
that heat trace.
exception 2 in proposal 38.
No, so it's not called out as heat trace.
No.
So I would argue that it's intended, exception number 2 is not intended for heat trace. It's for temperature maintenance, maintaining hot water within the building. And so I think, as Sean said, this proposal may not capture heat trace, but I think it should be explicitly called out when we get to this proposal as Ken recommended. And I support Elizabeth in P40 adding the electric resistance for heated plenums, for sure.
Okay, Chuck, I'll take that as a second for her motion then, if that's all right.
Yep.
Okay.
Of course.
Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is great discussion, everybody. Thank you. I agree with you, Ken. I think some redundancy here would be helpful, partly because the other, let's call it a heat trace exception, exception 2, where it's electric resistance elements used for recirc loop temperature maintenance, is only as it's applied to water heating. And I think it would help teams to clarify that that can also be for things that are not related to water heating equipment, like domestic cold water. I know there's some key drains, anything that you could just list it as freeze protection here. And I think that would help.
Okay, so Elizabeth and Ken, I'll open it up to you both on this if you wanted to make a further modification. Ken,
yeah, how about if you just expand number 8 and say electric resistance in heated plenums and freeze protection elements.
Works for me.
And then I don't know if that's proper IMC language. It gets the point across though.
Sure. And Chuck B, since you had a second, are you okay with that update on that?
Just a technical note phrased that way, the system would have to do both to qualify for the exception. So I think you probably, if you want both of them as exceptions, they should each be their own exception.
Could you put an or? Would that suffice?
You could. Some code snobs would get mad at you.
I was just trying to save you a line of code.
The rule of thumb is that if you put an or in an exception, it means you need a new exception.
All right, there you go.
But that's like the grammar Nazi version of the code world.
Okay,
and I think we want that
you would
to
need
say,
to repeat the electric resistance for the freeze protection.
There you go, beat me to it.
Okay, so Chuck B shook his head that he's okay with the second on this. Good. So there's a motion and a second. Jamie, go ahead.
My only comment on the sort of cleanup that we're trying to do on looking at exceptions for heat trace and others is like, so where would a sump heater go for a cooling tower? Is that, it's not a space heating equipment and it's not exactly in the service water heating either. So is it okay and just not covered by any of this? And so it's exempt to begin with?
Did you say a sump heater? A sump? I didn't quite hear what you said.
Yeah, and a cooling tower. Yeah. Freeze protection.
So that would
in the basin of the cooling tower.
Mm-hmm.
If I've got electric resistance heating elements in like towers. I don't see that as, it doesn't fit the definition of, it generally wouldn't be in C404 to begin with, but it doesn't quite fit the definitions there anyway. So I don't see it as something falling under what we're staring at on the screen here on C403. So I can use whatever I want, right? Maybe Ken wants to jump in.
I think that
I guess I was just going to say if we, oh, go ahead, Sean, sorry.
There are two interpretations possible, and I think each of them are favorable to you. One is that equipment doesn't fall under this requirement because it's not a warm air furnace or an electric resistant space heating equipment. And then if someone makes the argument that yes, since it's part of the cooling tower, it is part of space heating equipment, in which case, if it's freeze protection, it falls under the freeze protection exception.
That's what I was going to say. I agree with that.
Okay, great. All right, so there's a motion and a second on the table. The motion is to add line number 8, an exception, electric resistance in heated plenums, and line 9, electric resistance for freeze protection elements. I'll call a vote. All those in favor of that modification, please raise your hand. I see 15. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. All hands are down. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 1. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. So that modification passes. Is there a new motion on the table? Sounds like we've made some good updates. Eric, go ahead.
I'm gonna go ahead and move to approve as amended.
Okay, great. Ken, go ahead.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion before I call a vote? Seeing none, there is a motion to approve as amended and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. C15, go ahead and lower your hands. All hands are down. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. C1. Okay, so this one passes. Now we'll move on to item P38. Let me pull that up for you so it's on the screen. All right, so committee, this is your time now for modifications or other motions on this proposal or discussion. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Only because I probably should have known this, but I was confused by the phrasing. Is it possible to clarify this from water heating equipment to water heaters? And I say that because or service water heaters. And I say that because when I think about, well, all kinds of things heat water, right? But I think your intent is for service water heaters, correct?
It is service water heating equipment, yes.
Okay, and I might say that I don't know that, you know, like water heating equipment is, I know water heaters are defined, but is water heating equipment defined? And that was where my confusion was. And I know this is semantics, but finding a definition for water heating equipment as opposed to water heaters, which I can find.
So equipment is defined, so, but it's not defined as water heating equipment, doesn't have a standalone definition.
And I know this is kind of silly semantics, but I think that'll confuse people, I believe, because I would say that boilers heat water also, but I don't think that's your intent.
It's not the intent to capture boilers in the requirements, which is why it's limited to only those specific kinds. I think part of the idea around this section is that in the future it would expand to boilers, and that's why a generic title was used for it as opposed to a specific title. But you know, take that as you will.
Okay, Elizabeth, so are you wanting to make a motion to change the title C404.10 to service water heaters equipment? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think service water heaters, right?
get rid of
service
equipment.
providers.
Okay,
And then you do still have the equipment word in the following sentence, and I think that's fine. I think we're just defining the service water heaters themselves. Yes?
we will let Sean ponder that as he has a little pondering on his face there. And but there is a motion out on the table from Elizabeth. In the meantime, we'll continue and let Sean ponder some more. Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand item 6, the exception item 6, electric resistance equipment where not less than 100% of the annual service water heating is provided by on-site renewable energy. So I presume that refers to a solar thermal collector system, is that right?
So this refers to any electric resistance water heating equipment. You just have to supply an on-site renewable energy system, basically that can power it. And this parallels the requirement that's in Energized Denver, which allows for electric resistance water heating when it is served by a dedicated on-site renewable energy system.
Okay, but my question is about the on-site renewable energy system. Is that referring to solar photovoltaics or solar thermal or both?
It could be either. It could be wind. It could be, you know, true geothermal, as long as it's actual production.
Okay, I mean, the reason I ask is, and admittedly, we're not seeing very many solar thermal systems anymore with the advent of low-cost PV and heat pump water heaters. But for a solar thermal system, if you wanted to allow that, 100%.
So that is allowed under 8.
Number 8.
Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit different because a solar thermal would conceivably, if it had a backup, it wouldn't be 100%
right.
solar thermal.
All right, I see that. And 75%, yeah, that's kind of in the ballpark of what would be reasonable. So getting back to 6, if you did have an on-site solar photovoltaic system, wouldn't you still want to encourage the use of a heat pump water heater to make the best use of that solar electricity? Why would you want electric resistance equipment in that case?
It's less about wanting electric resistance, and it's more about this aligning with Energized Denver and creating a way to have an allowance for electric resistance. So the goal was, if you have electric resistance, and like I said, this is already in Energized Denver. So as we're thinking about the systems that, you know, are going to be required to be retrofit in the future. And then this brings, this encourages basically makes an electric resistance system zero carbon.
Okay. I guess one other question is, I'd still like if there's some way to require the use of a adjustable thermostatic mixing valve on the outlet of a hot water tank. That enables demand response uses in the future. Now, I'm not sure how to suggest that as an amendment, because basically this whole amendment is sort of saying what you can't do, not what you should do or can do. Is there any way that we could, in this particular amendment, get some requirement for a thermostatic mixing valve? Because if it has to be retrofit later, it has to be plumbed later, and it's just a much higher expense.
It's not a natural fit in this proposal,
Yeah.
since it is requiring something else.
Yes.
There is a requirement for demand responsive water heaters, but that doesn't quite address what you're talking about, which is superheating the tank and then using the thermostatic as part of demand response, and then using the thermostatic mixing valve to mix it down. Chuck Bartel, do you know if the plumbing code requires thermostatic already?
Only when the water heater is also used for space heating and the water is heated over 140 degrees, then the code chapter 5 requires, but there's not a Denver amendment that requires it overall. And I sort of agree that, I mean, Excel requires that thermal mixing valve to be part of their demand response program. And I think that thermostatic mixing valve would have been a natural fit in the demand response water heater proposal that went through. Or I believe it got, was it included in C406 as a credit that could be given? But I think that would have been a more natural fit for the thermostatic mixing valve.
Okay, I understand that
Either of the others.
I understand it's hard to fit into this particular one, but it would be great if it could be fit in somewhere. Thank you.
Okay, so there is a motion on the table to change the name. Ken, you're up next.
This is regarding exception number 9 for the changes that we talked about with the other code, or the other amendment where it talked about electric resistance in buildings shall comply. So that's what we would add here.
Okay, Elizabeth, since you have a motion on the table, are you okay with adding that to your motion?
Yeah, you bet. Maybe just want to clarify it as electric resistance water heating.
Okay. Chuck B, go ahead.
So I'm going to expand off of Elizabeth's proposed amendment. So service water heating defined in the IECC is supply of hot water for purposes other than comfort heating. And to me, that captures a large group like, you know, laundromats, dry cleaners, the pools. There's a whole group of process type that don't really have a good fit in this proposal, and there's not a good solution. The definition of water heater in the IECC talks about any heating appliance or equipment that heats potable water and supplies such water to a potable hot water distribution system. So I'm wondering if we should retitle this to include potable water heating equipment. Because I believe that's the intent of this proposal, is to electrify the potable hot water heating or water heating.
When the working group discussed this, that's where that exception 7 came in, because they felt like if it is a low temperature process hot water, that there was no reason to exempt it because it's basically the same equipment that's used for potable hot water. And so if it's high temperature hot water, then it is exempted. So all those process loads, as long as they're utilizing hot water, which all of the ones that the working group could think of needed water above 140 degrees, then those would be covered. So I don't know if you have one in mind of a low temperature process hot water that can't be served by the same type of equipment.
Pools.
So something other than a boiler?
Well, I mean,
since boilers aren't included in this?
Pool heaters are always interesting because they're still a water heater. And when they get over a certain BTU, they're rated by ASME, but they're really truly not a boiler. It's I mean, a lot of them go up to, you know, right up to the limit of 399 MVH to avoid that listing. But so I just don't think there's a lot of good options for pool heaters using heat pumps currently available. I mean, I think it's definitely an option. But I wonder in this proposal if we should specifically call out pools, break it out separately.
And sorry to speak out of turn, but we do know that water heaters is defined as you mentioned, Chuck, that's potable water.
So
does
yeah,
it solve it just to remove the word service and just call this water heaters?
I'd be good with that.
Because I think you make a good point. Service water heating does expand way beyond potable. Like that's a whole section 404, that's everything. So if we want to just call it water heaters, that is defined. So maybe, yeah, we just delete that word.
Okay.
Does that help?
Next up, we have. Go ahead, check. I think she was asking if that helped.
No, I agree. I like it because it leans on the definition that's already in the IECC.
Okay.
If you
next
wanted
up
to do that,
is
you would
Jamie.
need to, I'm sorry, if you wanted to do that, you would need to change it in the body. So where it says fossil fuel and electric resistance, instantaneous and storage, where it says water heating equipment, you would want to change that to water heaters. And that's what would actually make it happen. Making the change to the title doesn't impact the code requirement.
Thanks, John. Yeah, let's please do.
Okay. Next up, we have Jamie.
Yeah, just thinking about the exceptions and various nuances. How do you define require in exception 7? I guess what's preventing me from speccing something that just has a leaving water temperature that's 142 and just working around this?
So anything that you did to down mix it at the point of use would demonstrate that it did not require it.
Okay, to chew on that.
Yeah. All right. Next hand up is Elizabeth.
Yeah, sorry. Sean, you made me think of one other word that might make sense to change in that sentence that you edited to say fossil fuel electric resistance water heaters shall not be used to provide potable hot water rather than service hot water. I mean, maybe that's redundant, but might help. I think that, and again, that's the intent, correct? Is this is for potable?
So if you read Energize Denver, it specifically says service hot water. So Energize Denver will be applying to all service hot waters, not just potable hot water. So it will apply to process loads, but it has that same high temperature exemption. So that's something to just keep in mind, is that this would bring it out of alignment with Energize Denver. I'm not sure how substantive that is, since Energize Denver only exempts service hot water that's high temperature and not low temperature. So process loads that are high temperature are the only ones exempted under Energize Denver. So it gets back to that question that I had for Chuck of, are there any low temperature process loads? But you identified one, which was pools.
No, I can let that go. I think the definition of water heater is sufficient.
All right. Thank you. Next up is Courtney.
Thank you. Sean actually answered the question I was meaning to ask about doing an Energized Denver alignment check. I just want to maybe have a quick discussion on, is this the right way to go? Do we think the other exceptions help align that with Energized Denver more and not doing these modifications that we've been talking about? I just want to make sure we're ahead and not behind on that. So I appreciate some more conversation around these topics. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so there's a motion from Elizabeth to change the name, section C 404.10, and exception number 9 to add in some verbiage there. If we want to vote on that, that will need a second. Jamie, your hand's up. Go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to talk about something else, but if you want to vote on this first, that's fine. On the amendment, that is.
Go ahead, Jamie. It's discussion. If someone wants to raise their hand to second it in the meantime.
I
fine.
was pulling up some ASHRAE and ASPE Legionella stuff, and it's all fluctuating around the 140-degree temp or higher. So how does that fit in from a public health standpoint to this 140?
So in terms of Legionella itself?
Yes, Legionella prevention measures. So could people, like, because if the storage tank is if it's desired to be maintained above that temperature, above 140, then I'm providing 141-degree discharge or higher. And then I could say I just subverted this.
It's an interesting question. So there might be a question for Chuck, because there is guidance around Legionella, and then there are requirements for water temperature. A lot of the guidance around Legionella actually requires much higher temperatures than are actually required to account for Legionella. It is a combination of water temperature and exposure. So a lot of times they're asking for water temperatures to allow for instant or near instant killing of the Legionella. So Chuck, I don't know, does Denver have any requirements in place about maintaining certain water temperatures for Legionella? I keep putting Chuck on the spot.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No, there's currently no Denver specific amendments, and the IPC that's adopted does not address Legionella directly. Obviously, it's something that's discussed in other forums like ASPE, etc. But it's not something that's code regulated here in the city of Denver.
So since the end use does not require water at that temperature, it wouldn't, if your superheated Legionella fighting design would not qualify for the exception under this.
Okay, I see no more hands up. We do have a motion on the table. It needs a second to be voted on, or else it falls. So is there anybody else that wants to have discussion or make a motion or a second? And just to remind you, the motion on the table is to change the name of section C404.10 to water heaters, and then in the exception number 9, adding in the terms electric resistance water heating in buildings that comply with blah, blah, blah. Eric, go ahead.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Thank you, Eric. I will call a vote. All those in favor of those modifications, please raise your hand. Okay, 16, go ahead and lower your hands. My hands are down. All those opposed, please raise your hand. None, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. None. Okay, so that motion passes. Does anybody want to make a new motion? We've had some great discussion on this. Is everybody okay with this? Is there anything else you want to discuss or modify on this? Eric, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just to make a comment for the committee as we move forward with the previous proposal that was approved, and if this one is approved as well, I think it's important for committee members and everyone else to know that the city will be working to draft policy as necessary to help interpret and enforce the language that's here. So while I acknowledge and I'm very grateful for the discussion that we're having, we know that there's additional questions that will come up in the future in terms of more granular items that require discussion or interpretation. And we'll make sure that we get that in policy as we move forward. The advantage of both of these proposals, this one and the one prior to it, is that they don't become effective until January 2024. So we do have a little time to think and mull over them and draft that policy language to provide clarity, even if we don't need to amend the code language like we've done here. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody want to make a motion here? Elizabeth, go ahead.
I'll move to approve as modified.
Okay, thank you. Chuck K, go ahead.
I second.
Okay. Any further discussion before I call a vote? Seeing none, sorry, Chuck B, go ahead. You snuck right in there. You're on mute, Chuck.
Yep, sorry about that. So I did pull up the Denver Energized Denver ordinance that was accepted through City Council just to make sure that we're addressing the same systems. And so in the definitions of Energized Denver, the storage water heater specifically calls out for potable water for use outside the heater upon demand. And so I didn't see the service water heating specifically in the Energized Denver ordinance.
Chuck, you're right. I was remembering an earlier state of Energized Denver. So it does specifically call water heaters. So that does bring this into alignment.
Yeah, and so I didn't know if one of the previous recommended amendments that Elizabeth recommended of changing that final service water heater or service hot water to potable hot water would be a further clarification that would be worthwhile to align this with Energized Denver in section C04.10. And I hate to fill this in at the last minute, but I think
I'd like to withdraw my proposal to vote and do Chuck's thing. Potable. Yeah.
Okay, so Elizabeth, let me rephrase this so maybe we can move forward. How about approve as amended with the intent to also amend this service to potable?
There you go.
Is that okay? So that way your motion still stands, but you're adding something else in there. And Chuck K, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I guess I just have a question, and this is for the more practically experienced engineers than I, but when you have hot water, the solubility of calcium carbonate goes up, other minerals can get in the water. When I think of potable water, it's water that you can actually drink. And when water is stored for a long time at high temperatures, is it really potable? Just a general question.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I can just chime in there. I think it's kind of a moot point, Chuck, because the way that water heater is defined in the code, it says any heating appliance or equipment that heats potable water and supplies such water to the potable hot water distribution system. So I don't think it matters too much there just because of how the word water heater is defined.
Okay, thanks.
I think we're okay.
All right, any further discussion before I call a vote? Okay, so we're voting to approve as amended, and we're also voting simultaneously on changing service to potable in the sentence of 404.10. If you're not okay with either one of those, I would suggest voting it down and we can do those individually, but we'll vote on those together to be approved as amended, and also adding replacing the word service with potable in the first sentence there. All those in favor, please raise your hand. At 15, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. I have 1. Okay, so this proposal with those modifications passes. Quick time check. It is 4:10. We stop at 5 o'clock. We do have some the residential items to go through still. So with that time, I'm going to say a 7-minute break. Do what you need to do. Turn your cameras off. Check email. Go to the restroom. Grab a snack. We'll be back in 7 minutes and discuss residential. Okay, if you can hear my voice, let's start making our way back. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are going to continue on to the residential section of today's meeting, item number 47. And I believe, Sean, you're going to introduce us to this. I'll let you take the screen if you would like.
I think similarly, I'm going to start the introduction of the working group's work.
That works for me, Katrina.
All right. All right, so just to introduce you all to the residential working group. Let me share my screen. This is the group of stakeholders who met to discuss the residential proposals over the 4 working group meetings. I'd call your attention in particular to just look through who was there from the yellow stakeholder groups. We had heat pump manufacturer and distributor with Mitsubishi, a couple of the home builders who are on the committee, Bill Rictanis and John Dutch. One of our Denver Green Code committee members, Jonathan Fertig, who's an architect. Our Rocky Mountain Institute, Rob Buchanan from Excel oversees their residential programs for new homes. Christine from SWEEP, Mark, who's a committee member. So pretty good participation from the community. And as we can start to consider the R408 proposal, this of course is the residential prescriptive path that requires teams to achieve credits. There are different credit requirements in this proposal for an all-electric building and a mixed fuel building. It also incentivizes partial electrification, but there is still a path for gas buildings by requiring efficiency points or achieving efficiency points and having gas buildings. So the credits here will add flexibility for project teams that choose a prescriptive path for permitting a residential building. I just want to remind the committee we aren't considering the electrification proposals for residential. We heard pretty strong opposition to the two SWEEP proposals for which had proposed similar to what you just adopted, all electric space heat and all electric water heat for residential buildings. So those are not going to be considered. So the residential package, the 3 proposals you'll hear are the 3 high impact proposals from this working group. So with that introduction, I'll pass it to Sean to walk you through the R408 proposal.
All right, you'll have to stop sharing before I can start. There we go. All right, can we see this all right? Good. So a lot of what you'll see here will look familiar to what we discussed with C406 because there are a lot of the same principles behind it. So some of this will look familiar. And then, of course, parts of this are going to be specific to residential buildings. So, for example, you will see all electric property here with the allowances for emergency and standby generation systems being exempted from an all-electric property. You'll see the demand responsive signal control and program because we have a similar measure here for demand responsive controls that we did in commercial. And then of course we pick up these definitions for emergency power system and standby power system. There's one of the things that occurred as part of the discussion in the working group was just that the working group bumped up against the reality that the IECC implements 408 in a very awkward way. And so originally this proposal worked within the way that that the IECC 2001 adopted R408, but because Denver is looking for more efficiency, it really just highlighted that problem. So instead of this R401.2.5 additional energy efficiency to implement R408, that whole thing was crossed out and R408 was just added to the prescriptive path in R401.2.1, which you see toward the top of the screen. And the efficiency that is represented by R408 is added to R405 modeling, R406 ERI path. So that is a cleaner and much more understandable way to deal with R408, especially when we get into the discussion of minimum renewables, where we might be asking for additional efficiency even above and beyond R408. I'll also just mention, we went ahead and removed 401.2.4 since it doesn't apply to Denver. So make sure that here you see in R405.2, this is where that implementation of the efficiency comes from. And like in C406, we have an all-electric building just has to meet IECC 2021 levels of performance. It is only the mixed fuel buildings that we are asking for more. So here, that's where you see this occurring, is that it's one requirement for all electric and then the other one for mixed fuels. All this does is align R405 with the prescriptive and R408. Because R406, which is the ERI path, required more modifications, that is a standalone proposal. It handles the calibration within that proposal, and we've not done that here. And then most of the rest of this should look pretty familiar to you. You'll see the credit values for each of these individual sections. The working group did quite a few things to refine and really dial in some of these requirements. And so things like clarifying that you can use heat recovery ventilation, and making sure that all of the language was and the numbering was just right. I'll go down to where I think some of the bigger, here's where we see the addition of demand responsive controls. And again, it's like we talked about in C406, the same setup where they have to be listed for participation in a demand response program that serves the building site. So this does allow buildings to use demand response to get some extra points within this system. So I'm happy to answer any questions that we have about this.
And Sean, the only other thing I might add, just to clarify for the committee, since I know neither John Dutch or Bill Rectanis, who are maybe the most involved committee members in this working group, are here at the moment, is just remember there's 3 residential proposals before you, and this is the first one, right? So this is the prescriptive path. Then we'll hear the ERI path, which is number 31, and then the minimum renewables proposal, number 67. And so we spent a lot of time, just to sort of reflect for you who weren't there on the working group process, we spent a lot of time working through these details to make sure the details were right within this proposal and the ERI path proposal, to make sure they're workable, the details were right. But the sort of level of ambition of how much are we really going to do this code cycle in Denver mostly falls within that third proposal that you're here, number 67, the minimum renewables proposal, where there's different pathways. And we spent a lot of time thinking through what was striking that balance of achievable yet ambitious and really practical but bold, and finding that balance with the working group. So just know that there's more coming on that as we get to that third proposal. Is there anything you'd add, Sean, just in terms of context of how to think about these 3 as we turn to residential now for the first time in a while with this group?
Mm-hmm. I think recognizing that this was fine-tuned, some of the fine-tuning in this was made to make sure that this does interact well with the other compliance paths and with the other proposal about minimum renewable energy. And I will highlight one thing, since electrification, we just finished a big long discussion about electrification. And as we noted, there's not a mandatory electrification proposal for residential, but you'll also notice that unlike the commercial proposal, there is not a credit option just for water heating or space heating electrification. And that's because since this proposal creates the credit system completely and it's based on modeling, all of these were modeled relative to a gas building baseline. So that means all of the electric measures already account for the benefit of electrification. So it's boiled in here as opposed to just being a standalone electrification. So I figured there might be a question about that. I just preempt it.
Great. Thanks, Katrina and Sean, for the introduction. Courtney, did you have something to add real quick before we go to the general public?
I do. I want to just bring up a similar process as we did last time to see if the committee wants to hear all three of the proposals together, like we did for the electrification, if you found that helpful, or we can split them up individually. So I guess my motion to figure that out would be, would you like to hear them all together? If that's agreeable to Eric and Kevin.
Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. It's my opinion that this first proposal is quite substantial. I'm a little concerned about confusion. I certainly won't speak for anyone else on the committee. But I think hearing at least this first one independently could be valuable, and we can certainly provide responses that reference the other two. But considering that we've got 6 pages of amended text here, I'm not sure if it's going to work to hear all three of them at the same time. That's just my 2 cents, but if the committee would prefer to hear them, then that's fine too.
Okay, so Courtney, I'll ask if there's a second to hear all three together. If there is not a second, then we'll proceed forward. If there is a second, we will vote. So is there a second to hear all three of these residential proposals together? I'll ask a second time, is there a second on that? And a third time, is there any second? There's not. Okay, so that, Courtney, that motion falls, but thanks for bringing that up. We can always do that for the next two if you think that's beneficial. So we will continue on to the general public. General public, anybody that wants to speak in support of proposal number 47, please raise your hand. Johnny, you have 2 minutes to do so, but before you do, please introduce yourself.
Hey there, my name's Johnny Kocher with Rocky Mountain Institute. I would like to speak in favor of this proposal with a few reservations. I think that Rocky Mountain Institute would have rather seen proposals the commercial side where they're a little bit more prescriptive and not necessarily point-based. I think that it's a little more simple for people to understand. I think these point-based systems do work. I have seen them work in Washington, and they did have great results there. But I do think that kind of the point-based systems do tend to be a little bit more complex, and it's harder for some folks to understand. So I think support with some reservations. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. I'll put you back on mute. Christine, go ahead.
Thank you, Christine Brinker from Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. Like Johnny, I would like to express support with some reservations, and I do hope you can at least consider or hear all three proposals together before you vote on them, even if you're just answering questions on them one at a time. I've been okay all along with proposals that highly favor electrification, even if it's through the point system rather than kind of a blunt force of just requiring heat pumps. So the concept and the methodology seems okay. to me. As far as the stringency, I do wish that this could require more than 18 points, even if you only bumped it up to 20. I think that that would make a big difference. It does get to the stringency we need if you combine it with the renewables proposal and someone picks efficiency there rather than renewables. But in reality, almost everyone is going to pick renewables. So they would pick the 18 points from here, assuming they're mixed fuel, they pick the 18 points from here and the renewables. And I have concerns about the limited impact of the renewables proposal, which I can detail in once we get there. But if you're looking at just this alone, or just this combined with renewables, I don't think it gets quite to where we need to be. Though I am fully supportive of the concept. Thank you.
Thank you. Second call for anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I will go back to the committee now. Committee, this is your time to ask questions of the proponent. Any questions from the committee? This is a big proposal. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still digesting this one as well. But I wanted to, if we could just clarify, maybe scroll up to the top, right where the intro to section R408 is, yeah, right there. Oh, too far. Sorry, where it says additional energy efficiency credits, right below the definitions and stuff. Yeah, right there, right there. So for projects that are going all electrics, let's say. So they would be meeting basically one of the two electric options. So for space heating would be 8.2 or 8.3. And then for water heating, it would be 10.2 or 10.3. Can we still, let me back up, sorry. So our all electric project, if they're doing electric water heating, it looks like the way that that number 3 is written, that they would not be able to take any credit for going to the premium performance electric water heating based on the fact that they can't take any credits from section R408.10. So there's also 10.4 and 10.5. And I don't know if that was intentional, that you can't give that project more credit for, going the extra mile for premium efficiency water heating, or if that was an oversight.
It was intentional. The working group discussed this idea of whether the all-electric properties should be able to use, further equipment efficiency to be able to get to those, the few credits that they have to get. And there was a general desire to see that efficiency come out of the building rather than the equipment. So improvements to the building. And that's why it already requires, a modest, basically above code equipment levels of efficiency for space and water heating, but then to get those 3 points from the building. So from an envelope, or conceivably it could come from lighting or from ventilation, just looking outside of just equipment efficiency.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Third and final call from the committee. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll go back to the general public. Any rebuttals in support from the general public, please raise your hand. Second call, any rebuttals in support from the general public, please raise your hand. Third and final call, any rebuttals in support. Seeing none, we didn't have anybody speak in opposition, so we'll skip that and go back to the committee for discussions or to make a motion. Committee, this is your time to make a motion or have further discussion. Elizabeth.
Sorry, me again. I have just another question as it relates to the water heating again, 10.2 versus 10.3. Can we scroll down to those, how those are written out? What is the difference between these two, besides one is in conditioned space and one is in unconditioned space? Like, is there a reason to have two different credits here? I mean, could we just say that the efficiency is no less than 2? And then same question for 10.4 and 10.5.
So when we did the modeling to determine the efficiency credits themselves, there was a difference in the amount of savings for a heat pump water heater, depending on whether it was an unconditioned or unconditioned space.
Oh, I see, because they're different point levels.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
And so that's really all it comes down to.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Any other discussions or anybody want to make a motion? It's getting late. So we have a big proposal on the table in terms of number of pages. I know that's a lot to take in. Hopefully you all had an opportunity to read beforehand before you make these decisions. But if there's no further discussion, we can ask for motions. Is everybody okay with this? Is anybody not okay with this? Be okay putting this into the hands of the working group? Courtney, go ahead.
I'm open to further discussion from the committee, but I will make a motion to approve as written.
Okay. There's a motion to approve, but she is open to further discussion just to keep the conversation going. Okay, I'm seeing no discussion happening, so I'm going to keep things moving. I'll ask to see if there's a second on the motion to approve.
This is Paul Creasure, and I'll second that.
Okay, Paul seconds. Okay, any discussion before I call a vote? This is your last opportunity to get any last things out before we call a vote. Okay, seeing none, I will call a vote. There is a motion to approve this proposal and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. E13, go ahead and lower your hands. Okay, all are lowered. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Go ahead and lower your hands. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. One, go ahead and lower your hands. Okay, this passes 13 to 1 to 1. So that brings up our next item of business, which is item number 31. We already had a brief introduction from Katrina on the working groups on all three of these. So Katrina, if you have anything else to add, feel free. If not, we will go to Sean/Robbie.
I'll just add, I won't show you the working group members again. It was the same group. I'll just note that this proposal links the ERI modeling path to the city's goals, and that it has been refined to not require solar. And we combined two proposals, number 19 and number 31, to make this proposal out of the working group. And similar to the other one, this is really so the working group spent a lot of time sort of making sure the details are right here. And that generally the calibration was in line with our goals. So go ahead, Robbie, with the description of the details.
Yeah, starting from the top to the bottom, all electric properties is becoming a defined term, which is straightforward. The tropical climate zone is taken out of this for the R401 compliance options, because obviously it's not applicable to the city of Denver. In the additional efficiency options, the R408 section is removed for the ERI pathway because the ERI score threshold is already achieving the goals of the additional efficiency options there. As you may remember, in the 2021 code, they removed the language mandatory and just replaced it with requirements. So this requirements table is telling you what is required based off of the Section 401 requirements that used to be considered the prescriptive requirements for the house there. A few things have been added to make it consistent, make the requirements for all the pathways, the different compliance options equivalent to each other with regards to those things that are really dealing with the installation of an item, not dealing with the R value or U value of the item. Those are things that ultimately can be traded off there. The rest of the proposal has really been, the objective is to really simplify the energy rating index pathway to bring it into alignment with the ANSI ResNet IECC 301 standard by removing the ventilation amendment that was in the body of the code that made the ANSI ResNet 301 version of the energy rating index diverge from the IECC index. Now they will be equal in essence to each other. And then just reviewing what Katrina was saying, the merging of the two proposals led to a little bit different language in the ERI scores, which would be up a little bit on the screen there. So that they're now, instead of having one energy rating index score that you are trying to achieve, you have an energy rating index score of 55 for properties that are electrified, and an energy rating index score qualification for or compliance for a house or all other buildings that aren't electrified. The rest of the changes are really just numbering changes because of what was crossed out at the beginning of the ERI pathway in the 2021 IECC to simplify and encourage the use of this pathway.
All right, thank you, Katrina and Robbie. That being said, we will now go to the general public. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Christine, go ahead. You'll have 2 minutes.
Christine Brinker with Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. I'd like to speak in support of this. It's a great idea. It's fairly simple, and that's all I'd say.
Thank you. Next up, we have Johnny. Johnny, go ahead. You'll have 2 minutes.
Johnny Kocher, RMI, and Christine said it better than I ever could. So also in support. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Nice and simple. Second call for anybody in support from the general public. Third and final call. Anybody wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. All right, we'll go in opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go back to the committee for any questions. Committee, this is your time to ask questions. Mike, go ahead.
I think previously when I looked at this, we only had the one ERI rating for 50, and that was the support for deleting the thermal envelope backstops because the ERI score was so low. But now that we've got the second score in 55, does that create any concern for the thermal envelope?
For me, it doesn't, but I think that's potentially an individual call.
Okay, can renewables be factored into the ERI score too to further maybe compromise the thermal envelope?
No, the idea here is that this score is before renewables. And that's why I don't believe that the thermal envelope is being compromised.
So where does it preclude renewables in either the renewable proposal or this one? Or in the renewables, I notice it says on-site renewable energy systems used to comply with this section shall not be included in the calculations for the section of 406. But does that mean that if you had multiple systems or exceeded the minimum requirements in the renewable section, that could be figured into the calculation of the ERI?
I don't believe so for for compliance with the code. For general creation of an energy rating index score, yes, it would be included at some point. But they have to achieve that score without renewables, and that's what protects the building thermal envelope.
Where is that stated though?
I believe in that other proposal that you were talking to.
But then I'm just not clear on the language in that other proposal, I suppose, because it says, the energy systems used to comply with this section shall not be included in the calculation of your ERI score. Doesn't mean that if they're going above and beyond, that couldn't be factored in, or they could use different systems.
Well, I think it's a good point, and I can't point directly to that because things have changed a bit. Sean, do you know where that was located?
I am looking right now.
Because it looks like that line has been crossed out.
Okay, for the interest of time, Mike, we got a pending question from you that both Robbie and Sean are looking into. Do you have any other questions?
No, just that one.
Okay, so hopefully they can have some time here while we move to the next question and maybe come back to answering yours.
Sure.
Next question comes from Paul.
Well, I'll reiterate that was a concern that I had in reading this, that I didn't see where it was the energy rating index was without solar on there. But so that being addressed, Robbie, I think this is directed to you. Can you expand a little bit on the type of modeling, like the examples of homes that were modeled to come up with the ERI scores on this? Were they single family, attached, townhomes, scenarios? Is there any feedback you can give on that? I'm just curious how the number got determined.
The score was determined more based off of the city's goals to get to zero, and their goal for utilizing the energy rating index as a means to measure the goal to get to zero energy. And 50 was set at the goal for the 2021 cycle there, more than from modeling specific homes there. But some modeling did occur and demonstrated that in order to get to a 50 or 55 range, you have to have roughly equivalent to the 2021 IECC R value table levels there.
Good.
So
Okay.
I think Mike is correct that we need to go back and reinsert that language that ensures that these scores are met without using PV in the model, in the energy model, because it looks like it's been taken out and I'm not seeing it referenced anywhere else.
Right. Good. Thank you, Robbie, and thank you, Mike.
Okay, any other questions?
So, I mean, we could do a quick amendment if we want to continue with the vote in that section N1106.4 and say in that sentence, less than or equal to the appropriate value indicated in the table before on-site renewables, OPP, are added to the model.
I like that, Robbie. I'll
Okay.
interject that we want to include things like community solar gardens somehow in that wording as well. So being that Excel's offering that to Marshall fire victims, et cetera.
Well, okay, we could just say renewables then.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that answers or addresses Mike's and Paul's kind of concern there. Sounds like the proponent is open to adding that in there when the time comes for a modification. So hopefully that answers your guys' question. We'll move to the next question. Courtney.
Thank you. This is a question for Paul and Mike and the rest of the committee. Curious if you would want to have a cap on the solar allowed, like a 5% cap. I think we discussed that in the working groups. I'm just not sure if we ever got to putting that language in this proposal. If you feel if a cap is to not trade off any efficiency.
Courtney, I can answer that. I'd say I don't see a need for a cap on renewables so long as the ERI index has to be met, the 50 or the 55, without solar. And then if they want to take it to -20 or whatever they can do with solar, I'm totally fine with that personally.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, third and final call for any questions from the committee. Seeing none, I'll go back to the general public. Are there any rebuttals in support from the general public? Please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to have a rebuttal in support, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public with a rebuttal in support? I don't see any, and we didn't have anybody speak in opposition. So we go back to the committee now for further discussions or anybody that wants to make a motion.
I'm not a committee member, but I would suggest that we type in right where the cursor is, I believe, without renewables, so that people can see that language. And then I would propose that somebody make a motion to pass.
Right. So I would make a motion with that wording being drafted in, something to that effect. I'd like to see that. And then
Okay, so Paul has made a motion to add the text without renewables in 1106.4.
We want to say without or prior to. I know, it just allows it to be a little more leading that people should still think about solar, I guess. But so that would be my preference, to say prior to renewables.
Okay. So there's a motion on the table to add text. Is there a second to that motion?
There isn't a second, that will fall. Mike, go ahead.
I'll second.
Okay, Mike seconds that. Any other discussion? Anybody else have anything else that they want to talk about? We'll call a vote on just that modification to section N 1106.4/R406.4 to add prior to renewables as it's on the screen. All those in favor, please raise your hand. B14, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 1. Go ahead and lower your hands. Okay. Any other motions? Any other discussion? So the working group has come up with this language, and it seems like the committee doesn't have any discussion on this, further discussion, or everybody's a little bit anxious about it. Does anybody want to make a motion on this one to approve or reject? I heard a little debate there. Does anybody want to have further discussion before you make a motion? That makes you feel more comfortable. Courtney.
I don't always want to be the one to make up the first motion, but I'll make a motion to approve as amended.
Okay. Right. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to try to continue the discussion. I'm not as familiar with this methodology. So I was wondering if those who are might be able to maybe share some examples of all electric properties or all other buildings that might meet these targets. What type of systems and envelope would be expected? Like, do we see that aligning with what just got voted in for C408? Like, what would an all-electric property meeting the ERI of 55, what would that look like?
So in order to meet that 55, you would have a building thermal envelope that would be consistent with the R value table of the 2021 IECC. But this pathway gives you a little bit more flexibility in moving the R values and U values around the building envelope to make them work for whatever type of construction methodology that you're more familiar with. So for example, the IECC says in climate zone 5, put R60 in the attic. Well, maybe I'm a builder that doesn't think that R60 makes sense there. I can trade that off for better performance, maybe in my windows, than a 0.30 U value there. So we're getting comparable building thermal envelope, but you're getting some ability to trade because you have the performance model there. With regards to mechanicals, that's really what the electric properties are, is the mechanical efficiencies of those electric appliances. This doesn't necessarily preclude inefficient electrical, but the other proposals have been added into the Denver code to ensure that heat pump water heaters, for example, instead of electric resistant water heaters are used. So we're expecting that all electric properties would look like heat pump heating and cooling systems, heat pump water heaters. And because electric cooking can be added into this energy model, that appliance efficiency would be included there as well. So that's kind of what an all electric property would look like.
Thank you.
So hopefully that definition or that little bit of supporting detail might make you feel a little bit more comfortable on this, in addition to knowing that there was a subcommittee that helped come up with this as well. So I will say one more time here because we're
I would just say that all electric properties were defined at the beginning of the proposal as well.
Okay, great. That there is a motion on the table to approve. Is there a second on that motion?
This is Paul. I'll second that motion.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And remember that if you are not comfortable with this, you are still able to vote in opposition of this, which is fine if you're not quite there. So there's a motion to approve as amended and a second. I will call a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I see 10. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. 11. Sorry, it was one that popped up last minute. My hands are down. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. That's 3. Okay, so it passes. Thank you all for that. Sorry, ran over by 3 minutes, but thank you all for hanging out a little bit longer. It did make good progress for us to get some of these under our belt here, so I appreciate that. Just a quick reminder before you go, 1 week from today, the 26th of July, is our final hearing, so please make an effort to be in attendance on that. If you can't be in attendance, please find someone to take your spot as a voting member on that, and that's all I have. Thank you all for a great discussion today. I'll stay on the line if anybody wants to have any further discussion, but I'll end the recording here and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.